The howling wind rattled the windows of Tucker Sullivan's isolated cabin as he stared into the flickering flames of his hearth, whiskey in hand, and memories weighing heavy on his mind. Winter had come early to Montana Territory in 1878, bringing with it a blizzard fierce enough to make even the most seasoned frontiersmen think twice about venturing outdoors. Tucker had seen many winters in his 32 years, but something about this one felt different, a premonition he couldn't shake, like the world outside his door was about to change forever. The brutal snowstorm had raged for 3 days straight, turning the landscape around his ranch outside Miles City into a white wasteland. Most folks had the good sense to stay indoors during such weather, which was why the sound of his horses whinnying nervously in the barn caught Tucker's attention. Setting down his glass, he moved to the window, squinting through frost-covered panes at what appeared to be a dark shape moving slowly toward his property. "What in God's name?" he muttered, reaching for his coat and rifle. No traveler in their right mind would be out in such conditions unless desperate circumstances forced them to it. Tucker lit a lantern and stepped out onto his porch, the cold air slicing through him like a knife. The shape resolved itself into the form of a horse and rider, moving at an agonizingly slow pace through knee-deep snow. The horse stumbled, nearly falling, before righting itself and continuing its labored journey. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, Tucker trudged through the snow toward the approaching figure. As he drew closer, he realized the rider was slumped over the saddle, barely hanging on. When he reached the exhausted animal, he placed his hand on its frost-covered flank before looking up at the rider. "Hey there," he called. "You all right?" The rider made no response. Tucker reached up, gently pulling back the ice-encrusted scarf that covered most of the person's face. To his surprise, he found himself looking at a woman, her skin pale as the snow around them, lips tinged blue with cold. Her eyes fluttered open, briefly eyes the color of summer sage before closing again. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" Tucker touched her arm, feeling the dangerous chill even through her layers of clothing. "Damn it," he muttered, immediately reaching up to lift her from the saddle. She fell into his arms like a rag doll, her body limp and frighteningly cold. Tucker hoisted her against his chest and turned toward the cabin, calling over his shoulder to his ranch hand who had appeared in the doorway of the bunkhouse. "Pete, get our horse to the barn, quick." The woman in his arms was light, too light, and Tucker moved as fast as the deep snow would allow. By the time he reached his cabin door, his own face was numb with cold, and her stillness had him deeply concerned. He'd seen men die from exposure before it was not a fate he'd wish on anyone. Inside, he laid her gently on the bearskin rug in front of the fire, quickly adding more logs to build up the flames. Her face was delicate beneath the grime of travel, framed by dark auburn hair that had escaped from beneath her hat. She couldn't be more than 25, he guessed, wondering what desperate circumstance had driven her out into such deadly weather. Tucker worked quickly, removing her frozen outer garments, boots, and gloves. Her fingers were white at the tips, frostbite beginning to set in. He rubbed them gently between his own calloused hands, trying to restore circulation without causing more damage. "Come on now," he murmured. "Don't you die on my floor, madam." He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, placed pillows beneath her head, and continued to work at warming her hands and feet. For nearly an hour he kept vigil, periodically checking her breathing and pulse. Both were weak but present, which he took as a good sign. When her eyelids finally fluttered again, Tucker leaned forward, relief washing over him. She stared at him in confusion, fear flickering across her face as she tried to sit up. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentle. "You're safe. My name's Tucker Sullivan." You're at my ranch about 5 miles outside of Miles City." She licked her cracked lips, her voice barely audible. "Mackenzie. Mackenzie Novak. Miss Novak, you nearly froze to death out there. What in heaven's name were you doing traveling in this storm?" She tried to answer but dissolved into a fit of coughing instead. Tucker helped her sip water from a tin cup, supporting her head with his hand. "Running," she finally whispered. "Had to keep moving." Running from what? Her eyes, now alert enough to show genuine fear, met his. "Who?" she corrected, before her strength gave out and she sank back into the blankets. Tucker frowned. He'd lived in Montana territory long enough to know that people who came here often brought troubles with them. Some were running from the law, others from personal demons or enemies made in previous lives. This woman Mackenzie had been desperate enough to risk death in a blizzard rather than stay wherever she'd been. "Rest now," he told her, tucking the blankets more securely around her shoulders. "Whatever you're running from, it won't find you tonight. Storm's too bad." That seemed to reassure her, and she closed her eyes, exhaustion claiming her almost instantly. Tucker settled into his chair nearby, cleaning his rifle and occasionally adding wood to the fire. His quiet ranch life had just become considerably more complicated, and he had a feeling that when the storm cleared, Mackenzie Novak's troubles would still be waiting. The night passed slowly. Tucker dozed in his chair, waking frequently to check on his unexpected guest and maintain the fire. Near dawn, he was startled fully awake by Mackenzie crying out in her sleep, her face contorted in distress. "No, please," she murmured. "I won't go back." Tucker knelt beside her, hesitant to touch her but wanting to offer comfort. "Miss Novak," he said softly, "you're dreaming." Her eyes snapped open, wild with panic until they focused on his face. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize him, then awareness returned. "Mr. Sullivan," she breathed. "I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for. How are you feeling?" She assessed herself, moving fingers and toes experimentally. "Better than I expected to. I thought I might." She trailed off. "Die out there," Tucker finished for her. "Very nearly did. Another hour in that cold and I doubt I could have helped you." Mackenzie pushed herself up to a sitting position, keeping the blankets wrapped around her. In the golden light of morning, Tucker could see her more clearly. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and a small, straight nose. Despite the pallor of cold and exhaustion, she was undeniably beautiful, though there was a wariness in her eyes that spoke of hard experiences. "I owe you my life," she said simply. Tucker shrugged. "Any decent person would have done the same. Not everyone is decent." The bitterness in her voice surprised him. He stood and moved to the small kitchen area of his cabin. "Hungry? I can make us some breakfast. Nothing fancy, but it's hot." She nodded, and he set about preparing a meal of cornmeal mush with molasses and strong coffee. As he worked, he sensed her watching him, evaluating. "Your clothes should be dry by now," he said, nodding toward her garments hanging near the fire. "I'll step outside while you dress, then we can eat." Mackenzie clutched the blankets tighter. "Thank you." Outside, Tucker leaned against the porch railing, watching as the storm began to abate. Sunlight broke through the clouds in places, causing the vast snow-covered landscape to sparkle like diamonds. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly deceptive in its deadliness, much like whatever situation his guest was fleeing from, he suspected. When he returned inside, Mackenzie was dressed, though she'd kept one of his blankets draped around her shoulders. She sat at his small table, looking out of place yet somehow fitting in the rustic setting. Her hair, now dry, fell in waves down her back, the rich auburn catching the firelight. "This is very kind of you," she said as he served the simple meal. Tucker sat across from her. "You planning on telling me what had you riding through a blizzard alone?" She took a sip of coffee, clearly considering her words carefully. I was working as a schoolteacher in Helena. There was trouble. I needed to leave quickly. Trouble with the law, her eyes flashed. No. Nothing like that. A man, then. She tensed. What makes you say that? Most troubles in this world come down to money, the law, or matters of the heart. You don't strike me as an outlaw, and school teachers don't make enough for money troubles to drive them into a snowstorm. Mackenzie set her spoon down. You're perceptive, Mr. Sullivan. Tucker, he corrected. And it doesn't take much perception. I've lived out here long enough to recognize someone on the run. She studied him, seeming to make a decision. Yes, it was a man. The son of a wealthy mine owner in Helena. He became fixated on me. When I rejected his advances, he didn't take it well. His father owns half the town, including the school board. He made it clear I would either accept his son's proposal or face consequences. Tucker's jaw tightened. So you ran. I tried transferring to another school first in Virginia City. He followed me there, made scenes, threatened me. When I found him waiting outside my boarding house one night, she shuddered at the memory. I decided to leave Montana entirely. I was heading east to my cousin in Minnesota. The storm caught me by surprise. It came on so fast. That's how they are out here, Tucker agreed. Looks like you'll be staying put for a while, though. Even after the snow stops falling, the trails will be impassable for days. Fear flashed across her face. I can't stay. He might, Miss Novak, Tucker interrupted gently. No one's traveling in this weather, including whoever's after you. You're safe here, at least until the trail's clear. She didn't look convinced, but nodded reluctantly. I don't want to impose. It's no imposition. Been a while since I had company that wasn't just passing through for business. He gestured around the cabin. It's not much, but you're welcome to stay as long as needed. Mackenzie's eyes softened. Why would you help a stranger like this? Tucker considered the question seriously. Out here, folks help each other. It's how we survive. Besides, he added with a small smile, I've got plenty of space and only myself to fill it. No wife, family, she asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, that's terribly forward of me. No need for apologies. Had a wife once, years back. Yellow fever took her and our baby boy before we ever made it out west. His voice was matter of fact, though the old pain still lingered beneath the words. I'm very sorry, she said quietly. Tucker nodded his acknowledgement. Been on my own since. Built this place up from nothing. Got about 60 head of cattle, few horses. It's a good life most days. It seems very peaceful, Mackenzie observed, looking around the simple but comfortable cabin. Can be. Other times it's back-breaking work that leaves no time for thinking. That has its merits too. He stood, clearing their breakfast dishes. You should rest more. Your body's been through an ordeal. I'd rather help if you don't mind. I'm not used to sitting idle. Tucker assessed her. She still looked pale and tired, but there was a determination in her eyes that he recognized, the same determination that had likely kept her alive in the blizzard. All right, he conceded, but nothing strenuous. We'll take it slow. The day passed in a quiet rhythm of domestic tasks. Tucker showed Mackenzie around the cabin, which, though simple, was well constructed and thoughtfully organized. There was the main room with its stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, his bedroom, and a storage room filled with supplies to last through winter. Despite her protests, Tucker insisted she take his bed while he would sleep on a bedroll by the fire. When she expressed concern about displacing him, he simply shook his head. Been sleeping rough since I was 16, he told her. One more night won't kill me. As dusk approached, Tucker needed to tend to his livestock. The snow had stopped, but drifts had piled high against the barn. I'll come with you, Mackenzie offered, already reaching for her coat. It's bitter cold out there, he warned. She raised an eyebrow. I nearly froze to death yesterday. I think I can manage a short walk to your barn." Tucker found himself smiling. There was a spirit in this woman that he admired, a resilience that matched the harsh beauty of the Montana landscape. The air outside was crisp and still, the temperature having plummeted as the storm cleared. Their boots crunched through the fresh snow as Tucker led the way to the barn, holding a lantern high to light their path. The sky above was clearing, revealing a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch. Inside the barn, the air was warmer, filled with the comforting smells of hay and animals. Tucker's cattle were housed in a separate shelter, but his horses and milk cow occupied stalls in the main barn. Mackenzie immediately went to her own horse, a sturdy chestnut mare who nickered in recognition. "Hello, Penny," she murmured, stroking the animal's neck. "Thank you for saving my life." Tucker watched as she examined the mare for any signs of injury or strain. Her movements were gentle but confident, revealing a lifetime of experience with horses. "You ride well," he observed. Not many women would attempt that journey alone, especially in those conditions. Mackenzie continued checking her horse's legs. "My father raised horses back in Ohio. I've been riding since before I could walk." "Ohio's a long way from Montana," she nodded. "After my parents died, there wasn't much left for me there. I wanted adventure, to see the West before it disappeared entirely. Teaching seemed the most respectable way for a woman to make her way out here." Tucker began distributing feed to the animals. And now, still looking for adventure. Her hand stilled on the horse's flank. "Now I just want peace. Somewhere I can feel safe again." The simple honesty in her voice struck Tucker deeply. It had been a long time since he'd wanted anything more complicated than a good year for his cattle and enough supplies to last the winter. But he remembered wanting peace, craving it during those dark days after losing his wife and child. "You'll find it," he said with more certainty than he felt. "Montana's a big territory, plenty of places for a person to start fresh." Mackenzie looked up at him, her expression unreadable in the lantern light. "Is that what you did? Started fresh?" "Something like that." He turned his attention back to feeding the horses, not wanting to delve further into his past. Some wounds, even old ones, were best left undisturbed. They worked together in companionable silence, finishing the evening chores before the cold could seep too deeply into their bones. As they walked back to the cabin, the northern lights began to dance across the sky, ribbons of green and purple light that made the snow-covered landscape seem otherworldly. Mackenzie stopped, her face upturned in wonder. "I've never seen anything like it." Tucker paused beside her. "Aurora borealis. Doesn't show itself too often this far south, but when it does." He trailed off, watching the play of colors reflect on her upturned face. "It's magnificent," she breathed. For a moment they stood together in silence, witnessing the spectacular light show. Tucker found himself studying her profile, struck by how the ethereal light transformed her already beautiful features into something almost magical. "We should get inside," he finally said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Temperatures dropping fast." Back in the warmth of the cabin, Tucker built up the fire while Mackenzie prepared a simple supper from his stores. They ate by firelight, sharing stories of their respective journeys west. Tucker spoke of his years as a trail hand, driving cattle from Texas to Montana, before saving enough to buy his own land. Mackenzie told him about her teaching positions in various frontier towns, and the children who had touched her heart along the way. As the night deepened, Tucker noticed her eyes growing heavy. "You should sleep," he suggested. "Your body's still recovering." She nodded, stifling a yawn. "I suppose you're right." She hesitated, then added softly, "Thank you again, Tucker, not just for saving my life but for making me feel safe." Something in her voice, in the vulnerability of her admission, touched a place in Tucker that had been dormant for years. He cleared his throat. "No need for thanks. Get some rest now." After Mackenzie retired to his bedroom, Tucker settled on his bedroll before the fire, staring up at the rough-hewn ceiling beams. Her presence had disturbed the careful solitude he'd constructed around himself, not unpleasantly, but fundamentally. For the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering what it might be like to have someone to share his days with again. With this unsettling thought in his mind, Tucker drifted into an uneasy sleep, listening to the wind whisper around the eaves of his cabin and trying not to think about the woman sleeping just beyond his door. Morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Tucker was already up and moving when Mackenzie emerged from the bedroom, her hair neatly braided and her borrowed clothes straightened as best she could manage. "Good morning," she said, looking more rested than she had since her arrival. Tucker nodded in greeting, handing her a cup of coffee. "Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "No dreams for once." They settled into a routine over the next few days. The snow remained deep, making travel impossible, but the clear weather allowed Tucker to resume his ranch work. Mackenzie insisted on helping, taking over much of the cooking and indoor tasks, while Tucker tended to the livestock and repaired equipment damaged in the storm. On the third day, Tucker returned from checking his cattle to find Mackenzie kneading bread dough, flour dusting her cheeks, and a look of concentration on her face. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected force, his lonely cabin transformed by her presence into something that felt dangerously like a home. "Never thought I'd see that oven used for actual baking," he commented, stamping snow from his boots. Mackenzie looked up, a smile lighting her face. "I found flour and yeast in your supplies. Thought you might appreciate something besides biscuits for a change." "Can't remember the last time I had fresh baked bread," he admitted, hanging his coat by the door. "Smells good." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "It's the least I can do." "I've been thinking about how to repay your kindness once the snow clears enough for travel." Tucker frowned. "Already told you there's nothing to repay. Nevertheless, I don't like being indebted. Perhaps I could sell my grandmother's brooch in Miles City, leave you with something for your trouble." "Keep your brooch," Tucker said firmly. "I don't need payment for basic human decency." Mackenzie studied him. "You're an unusual man, Tucker Sullivan." He shrugged uncomfortably. "Just doing what needs doing." That evening, they shared the fresh bread with a rabbit stew Tucker had prepared. The simple meal felt almost celebratory, and Tucker found himself talking more than he had in years, telling Mackenzie stories of the early days of the territory. "What made you choose ranching?" she asked as they sat before the fire afterward. "After all those years on the trail." Tucker stared into the flames, considering. "Wanted something of my own, I suppose. After Elizabeth, my wife, died, I drifted for a long while. Being a trail hand suited that restlessness. But eventually, a man gets tired of having nothing solid beneath him." "So you put down roots." "Tried to," he agreed. "This land gets in your blood after a while, makes you want to be part of it to build something that might last." Mackenzie hugged her knees to her chest. "I understand that feeling. It's why I kept trying to make teaching work despite everything. I wanted to belong somewhere." "And do you?" Tucker asked. "Feel like you belong out here in Montana," she sighed. "I did at times. When I was with the children, watching them learn and grow. Those moments felt right. But now I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm destined to keep moving." "Running, you mean?" Her eyes flashed defensively. "What choice do I have? You don't know Richard Blackwell or his father. They aren't men who take no for an answer." Tucker's jaw tightened at the fear in her voice. "These men, they threatened you physically." Mackenzie looked away. Richard made it clear that one way or another I would be his, whether as his wife or— She couldn't finish the sentence. And the law. A bitter laugh escaped her. The sheriff in Helena plays cards with Blackwell's father every Thursday. The one in Virginia City owes him money. That's how it works in mining towns. Money buys whatever protection you need. Tucker stood abruptly, moving to stare out the window at the moonlit snow. The anger he felt surprised him with its intensity. He'd known men like Blackwell, men who saw the world and everyone in it as property to be claimed. Such men had no place in the West he believed in, the one where a person could make their own way based on hard work and character. "You don't have to keep running," he said finally. Mackenzie looked up at him. "What do you mean?" Tucker turned from the window. "Stay here, at least until spring. By then, this Blackwell fellow will have moved on to some other fixation." "I couldn't possibly impose. It's not an imposition," he interrupted. "Place is too big for just me anyway, and I could use the help come calving season." She stared at him, clearly caught off guard by the offer. "You hardly know me." "Know enough," he said simply. "You're honest, hardworking, and you're in trouble. Where I come from, that's all that matters." Mackenzie's eyes shimmered with unexpected tears. "Why would you do this for me?" Tucker couldn't articulate the complex emotions driving his offer. He only knew that the thought of her leaving, of facing danger alone, was somehow unacceptable to him. "Maybe I'm just tired of talking to my horses," he said with a slight smile. "They're poor conversationalists." A laugh bubbled up through her tears. "And I'm better." "Considerably," he assured her. "Think about it. No need to decide right away." That night, Tucker lay awake longer than usual, questioning his own motives. He'd lived alone for so long that the prospect of sharing his space for months should have been alarming. Instead, he found himself hoping she would accept his offer. There was something about Mackenzie Novak that spoke to parts of himself he'd thought long dead: her courage, her resilience, the way she faced an uncertain future with determined grace. He admired these qualities, he told himself. That was all. It was simple admiration for a fellow survivor. If his thoughts lingered on the way firelight caught in her hair or how her rare smiles transformed her face, well, that was just natural appreciation for beauty. Nothing more. The next morning brought another clear, cold day. Tucker rose early to check on a pregnant heifer in the barn, leaving Mackenzie still asleep. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, he found her dressed and waiting for him, a determined expression on her face. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said without preamble. Tucker hung up his coat, careful to keep his expression neutral. "And? I'll stay, but on one condition." She straightened her shoulders. "I want to work real work, not just cooking and cleaning. I want to earn my keep." Tucker suppressed a smile. "Fair enough. Can you ride well enough to help check fence lines come thaw?" "I told you, I've been riding my whole life." "Ever help deliver a calf?" She hesitated. "No, but I'm a quick learner." "I don't doubt it." This time he did smile. "All right then, you've got yourself a deal, Miss Novak. You stay through spring, help with the ranch, and we'll call it square." She extended her hand formally. "Thank you." Tucker took it, surprised by the strength in her slender fingers. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection that went beyond words. For the first time since finding her half frozen in the storm, Tucker felt a flicker of concern about what he might be getting himself into. The days began to establish a comfortable rhythm. The extreme cold gradually eased, though winter still held Montana firmly in its grip. Tucker showed Mackenzie the workings of the ranch, his small but growing herd of cattle, the vegetable garden now dormant under snow, the spring-fed well that never froze even in the harshest weather. Mackenzie proved to be as capable as she'd claimed. Though city life had softened some of her farm-bred skills, she quickly readapted to rural work. She helped Tucker repair tack, learned to chop firewood efficiently, and showed unexpected talent with his tools when they mended a broken stall door together. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking or reading from Tucker's small collection of books. He discovered that Mackenzie had a beautiful singing voice, and occasionally she would sing old folk songs that reminded him of his childhood in Pennsylvania. As January melted into February, Tucker found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing the graceful way she moved, how her face had filled out as she recovered from her ordeal, the spark of intelligence in her eyes when they discussed the books they read. Something was growing between them, something that both exhilarated and terrified him. One evening, as a fresh snowfall blanketed the world outside, Mackenzie sat mending one of Tucker's shirts while he cleaned his rifle nearby. The domestic tranquility of the scene struck him with unexpected force. "I've been thinking," he said suddenly. Mackenzie looked up from her stitching. "That sounds ominous." He smiled briefly. "Nothing bad. Just been thinking we should ride into Miles City when the trail clears a bit, get you some proper clothes, supplies of your own." She set down her mending. "That's thoughtful, but I don't have much money." "I've been meaning to go anyway," he said, avoiding her concern about funds. "Need to check mail, pick up some items for the spring roundup." Mackenzie studied him. "You're not worried about being seen with me? What if word gets back to Helena?" Miles City's a different world from the mining towns. Folks mind their own business mostly. He reassembled his rifle with practiced movements. "Besides, you can't stay hidden forever." "I suppose not," she agreed quietly, "though sometimes I think that would be simpler." Tucker set his rifle aside. "What would you do if you didn't have to worry about Blackwell, if you could choose any future?" She considered the question seriously. "I'd still teach, I think. I love working with children. But I'd want a small school, maybe in a ranching community rather than a mining town." A wistful expression crossed her face. "And someday, I'd like a home of my own. Nothing grand, just somewhere that belongs to me, that can't be taken away." "Seems like a reasonable dream," Tucker said. "What about you?" she asked. "Is this ranch your final dream, or is there something more you want?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought about wanting more than what he had in a long time. Survival had been enough, then building the ranch, establishing himself. "Suppose I'd like to expand the herd eventually," he said slowly. "Maybe build a bigger house someday." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Always thought I'd have a family to fill it." Mackenzie's eyes softened. "You'd make a good father, Tucker." The simple statement touched him deeply, stirring emotions he'd long suppressed. "Been a long time since I thought about such things," he admitted. "Because of your wife," Tucker nodded. "Elizabeth was everything to me. When she died, it felt like the future died with her. Took years before I could even think beyond the next day." "And now?" Mackenzie asked gently. He met her gaze. "Now I'm starting to remember what it's like to look forward to things again." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Mackenzie broke the tension first, returning to her mending with a slight flush to her cheeks. "Well," she said lightly, "I'm looking forward to seeing Miles City. It's been too long since I've been anywhere but this cabin." Tucker accepted the change in subject, though the moment lingered in his mind long after they'd said good night and retired to their separate sleeping places. 2 days later, a brief warming trend made the trail to town passable. They set out early, bundled against the cold but grateful for the bright sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape glitter like diamonds. Tucker had saddled his most reliable gelding for Mackenzie, a steady bay named Doc, who handled the snow-packed trail with sure-footed confidence. Miles City was still small by Eastern standards, but it had grown substantially since its founding just a few years earlier. The settlement served as a supply hub for ranchers and a stopping point for travelers heading west into the territory. Main Street featured several mercantiles, a hotel, 3 saloons, and various other businesses catering to the needs of the frontier community. Mackenzie's eyes brightened as they rode into town. "It's larger than I expected." "Growing every year," Tucker replied, guiding his horse toward the hitching rail outside Harmon's general store. "Army fort nearby helps keep it stable." They dismounted, and Tucker noticed Mackenzie straightening her borrowed coat self-consciously. It was too large for her slender frame, clearly marking it as belonging to someone else. Inside the store, the proprietor greeted Tucker warmly. "Sullivan, haven't seen you since before Christmas. Thought maybe that blizzard got you." "Takes more than snow to keep me down, Harmon," Tucker replied, shaking the man's hand. "This is Miss Novak. She's working at my place through spring." If Harmon found anything unusual about Tucker having a female employee, he didn't show it. "Pleasure, miss. What can I help you folks with today?" While Tucker collected his mail and ordered supplies, Mackenzie browsed the modest selection of women's clothing. Her eyes lingered on a dark green dress displayed on a dressmaker's form. "That just came in last week," Harmon's wife said, approaching from behind the counter. "Latest fashion from St. Louis, or so they tell me." Mackenzie touched the fabric wistfully. "It's beautiful." "Would suit your coloring," Mrs. Harmon observed. "We don't get many young ladies your age out this way." Most of the women buying dresses here are ranchers' wives who care more for durability than style. Mackenzie smiled politely, but moved away from the display toward the practical items: sturdy work shirts, wool socks, and denim trousers like those worn by most ranch hands. Tucker, finishing his business with Harmon, noticed her selections. Without comment, he added them to his order, along with a pair of women's boots in what he guessed to be her size. "The green dress, too," he said quietly to Harmon, while Mackenzie examined a shelf of toiletries. "Tucker," she began to protest when she saw the growing pile of purchases. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he interrupted. "Can't have you working in borrowed clothes all spring." She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead nodded her thanks, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. After leaving their purchases to be packaged, Tucker suggested they visit the small cafe for lunch. The warm interior was a welcome respite from the cold, and the simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread tasted like luxury after weeks of their own cooking. As they ate, Tucker noticed a table of men watching Mackenzie with undisguised interest. It wasn't surprising new faces, especially female ones, were relatively rare in Miles City, particularly during winter. Still, their scrutiny made him uneasy. "Don't look now," he said in a low voice, "but we've drawn some attention." Mackenzie tensed visibly. "Do you recognize any of them?" "Just local ranch hands," he assured her. "Nothing to worry about, just not used to seeing a pretty face in town." The compliment slipped out unintentionally, and Tucker busied himself with his stew to hide his embarrassment. Mackenzie, however, seemed to relax slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you for bringing me today," she said. "It feels good to be around other people again." Tucker nodded. "Town's having a social next month once the worst of winter passes. Dancing, food, that sort of thing. You might enjoy it. Are you asking me to accompany you, Mr. Sullivan?" There was a teasing note in her voice that he hadn't heard before. Tucker looked up, meeting her eyes. "Suppose I am, Miss Novak." Her smile widened. "Then I accept." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the sheriff, a burly man named Frank Miller who stopped by their table. "Sullivan, good to see you," he said heartily. Heard you might have trouble with rustlers over by Beaver Creek. Tucker shook his head. Not my land, Frank. Mason's having the problem. Mentioned it when I ran into him before the big storm. The sheriff nodded, his eyes drifting curiously to Mackenzie. Sheriff Miller, this is Miss Mackenzie Novak, Tucker introduced. She's helping out at my place for a spell. Miller tipped his hat. Madam, don't believe I've seen you around these parts before. I'm new to the area, Mackenzie replied smoothly. Just arrived from Helena. At the mention of Helena, Tucker noticed a flicker of something cross the sheriff's face, not quite suspicion, but interest. Mackenzie must have noticed it too, for she quickly added, I was teaching there, but the position didn't work out. Mr. Sullivan was kind enough to offer me employment until I decide my next move. Miller nodded slowly. Well, welcome to Custer County. Hope you find it to your liking. After the sheriff moved on, Mackenzie exhaled slowly. Do you think he knew something? Tucker considered. Hard to say. Frank's a good man, but he corresponds with other lawmen across the territory. If your Blackwell has put out word about a missing schoolteacher. Fear flickered in Mackenzie's eyes. We should go. They finished their meal quickly and returned to Harmon's to collect their purchases. As Tucker was loading the packages onto their horses, he noticed Mackenzie had grown pale, her earlier good mood vanished. You all right? He asked quietly. She nodded stiffly. Just want to get back to the ranch. The ride home was silent, Mackenzie lost in her thoughts and Tucker respecting her need for quiet. The encounter with the sheriff had clearly shaken her, reminding her that even in Miles City, her past might find her. As they crested the final rise that overlooked Tucker's ranch, the sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Tucker reined his horse to a stop, taking in the view of his cabin nestled against the backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. Beautiful, isn't it? He said, breaking the long silence. Mackenzie stopped beside him, her eyes following his gaze. Yes, she agreed softly. Very beautiful. When I first came here, Tucker continued, this view is what sold me on the place. Reminded me there was still beauty in the world, even after everything I'd lost. She turned to look at him, her expression softening. Thank you for sharing it with me. Thanks for seeing it the way I do, he replied. Most people just see land, grass for cattle, nothing more. I see a home, she said simply. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Tucker nudged his horse forward, leading the way down toward the cabin. That evening, after they had unpacked their purchases and put everything away, Mackenzie surprised Tucker by appearing in the green dress. She'd done something different with her hair too, arranging it in a style that framed her face softly. Tucker looked up from the book he was reading and felt the breath catch in his chest. The dress fit her perfectly, the rich green bringing out the gold flecks in her eyes and complementing her auburn hair. I wanted to thank you properly, she said, smoothing the fabric nervously. For the dress and for everything else. Tucker stood, suddenly aware of how rough and worn his own clothes were. You look. He searched for an adequate word and failed. It suits you. A blush colored her cheeks. Mrs. Harmon was right about the color, I think. She was, Tucker agreed, finding his voice. You look beautiful, Mackenzie. The use of her first name, rare for him despite their weeks together, seemed to hang in the air between them. Tucker had maintained a careful formality, partly out of respect and partly to keep his growing feelings at bay. But seeing her now, transformed by the simple dress into an echo of the refined schoolteacher she had been, he found his careful barriers weakening. Mackenzie moved toward him, stopping just out of reach. I've been thinking about what you said in town about the social next month. Oh, Tucker kept his tone neutral, though his heart had begun to beat faster. If I attend with you, people will talk. They'll make assumptions about About us. Tucker nodded slowly. People always talk, nature of small towns. And that doesn't bother you, she pressed. What they might say about you taking in a strange woman, bringing her to social events. Only thing that would bother me, Tucker said carefully, is if it troubled you. Mackenzie studied him, her eyes searching his face. You're not like any man I've known, Tucker Sullivan. Is that good or bad? A small smile curved her lips. Good, definitely good. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Tucker found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the subtle floral scent that must have come from one of the toiletries purchased in town, the way the firelight played across her features. Before he could respond, a loud knock at the door shattered the moment. Tucker's hand instinctively moved toward his gun belt hanging near the door. Stay here, he murmured, moving to check the window before opening the door. His ranch hand Pete stood on the porch, snow dusting his coat and hat. Sorry to disturb you, boss, but we've got trouble. Two of the pregnant heifers broke through the ice at the North Creek. Got one out, but the other's still stuck. Tucker immediately reached for his coat. I'll come now. Get the ropes and tell Jim to bring lanterns. Mackenzie was already pulling on her own coat. I'm coming too. No need, Tucker began to protest. You said I was here to work, she reminded him. This is work. There was no time to argue. Minutes later, they were trudging through snow toward the North Creek, where one of Tucker's young heifers stood half submerged in icy water, bellowing in distress. The animal had wandered onto what appeared to be solid ground, only to break through a snow-covered section of partially frozen creek. The next hours were a blur of frantic activity. Tucker, Pete, and Jim worked to secure ropes around the frightened animal, while Mackenzie held lanterns high to illuminate their efforts. When it came time to pull, Mackenzie handed the lanterns to Jim and took her place on the rope alongside Tucker, adding her strength to the desperate rescue attempt. Their combined efforts eventually freed the heifer, though the animal collapsed on the bank, shivering violently. Tucker immediately removed his coat, throwing it over the creature's back. We need to get her to the barn, he shouted over the wind that had begun to pick up. She'll die out here. They fashioned a makeshift sled from branches and Tucker's coat, managing to drag the exhausted heifer back to the warmth of the barn. By the time they arrived, all four humans were soaked and freezing, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. While Pete and Jim tended to the rescued animal, Tucker noticed Mackenzie shivering uncontrollably, her dress and coat sodden from the creek water that had splashed during their rescue efforts. You need to get inside, he said urgently. Those wet clothes will kill you in this cold. She nodded, her teeth chattering too hard to speak. Tucker wrapped an arm around her shoulders, hurrying her toward the cabin. Once inside, he stoked the fire to blazing before turning to Mackenzie, who stood dripping and shaking by the door. You need to change immediately, he said, moving toward his bedroom to give her privacy. I'll heat water for Tucker, she interrupted, her voice trembling. I can't. My fingers won't work. The buttons. He turned back to see her struggling with her coat, her hands shaking too violently to manage the fastenings. Without hesitation, he crossed to her, gently brushing her hands aside to unbutton the coat himself. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes meeting his. Tucker worked quickly, helping her remove the heavy, wet coat before stepping back. Can you manage the rest? I'll turn my back. She nodded gratefully, and Tucker moved to the fire, adding more wood while keeping his back firmly toward her. He heard the rustle of wet fabric, then her soft voice again. Could you hand me the blanket? I'm so cold. He turned, keeping his eyes averted, and reached for the heavy woolen blanket draped over his chair. As he held it out behind him, he felt her fingers brush his as she took it. All right now, she said after a moment. Tucker turned to find her wrapped in the blanket, the wet dress discarded on the floor. Her hair hung in damp tendrils around her face, and her skin was still pale with cold, but the violent shivering had subsided somewhat. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, moving to put water on to heat. "I'll make something warm to drink." While the water heated, Tucker quickly changed his own wet clothes, returning to find Mackenzie huddled close to the flames, the blanket pulled tight around her. "That was quick thinking with your coat," she said. "You saved that heifer's life." Tucker shrugged. "Wouldn't have been able to pull her out without your help. Not many women would have jumped in like that." "Not many women nearly freeze to death only to be rescued by a rancher," she replied with a hint of a smile. "Perhaps I've developed a fondness for saving creatures from the cold." Despite the tension of the evening, Tucker found himself smiling back, including stubborn ranchers. "Especially stubborn ranchers," she agreed, her eyes warming. He handed her a mug of hot coffee laced with whiskey. "Drink this. It'll warm you from the inside." Their fingers touched again as she accepted the mug, and this time neither pulled away quickly. A moment of connection passed between them, deepened by the shared experience of the rescue and their growing comfort with each other. Later, after Mackenzie had retired to bed and Tucker lay on his bedroll before the fire, he found himself unable to sleep. The image of Mackenzie in the green dress, transformed and beautiful, kept returning to his mind, along with the memory of her shoulder pressed against his as they worked to save the heifer, the trust in her eyes when she asked for his help with her coat. Something was changing between them, something that both exhilarated and terrified him. After years of solitude, of carefully guarded emotions, Tucker found himself facing feelings he'd thought long buried with Elizabeth. The realization should have filled him with guilt, but instead he felt a tentative hope, as if spring were thawing something frozen within him. With this unsettling thought, Tucker finally drifted into sleep, dreaming of green dresses and auburn hair illuminated by firelight. February brought warmer days interspersed with periodic snowstorms. As Tucker had predicted, several of his heifers began calving, keeping both him and Mackenzie busy with middle-of-the-night checks and occasional assistance with difficult births. Mackenzie proved to be a quick study, following Tucker's instructions calmly even during the most challenging deliveries. Her gentle way with the animals impressed him, as did her willingness to tackle the messy, exhausting work without complaint. One evening, after successfully helping a young cow deliver twins, a rare and dangerous occurrence that had required both their efforts for hours, they sat together on a hay bale in the barn, watching the mother nuzzle her newborns. "Never gets old, does it?" Mackenzie said softly. "Seeing new life begin." Tucker nodded, aware of her shoulder pressed against his, both of them too tired to maintain their usual careful distance. "Best part of ranching, if you ask me. Better than the wild adventures of your trail-driving days," she teased. He chuckled. "Those weren't nearly as exciting as the stories make out, mostly just dust, discomfort, and bad food. Yet you did it for years." Tucker considered this. "Suppose I wasn't ready to stop moving back then. After Elizabeth died, staying in one place felt like dying myself." He glanced at Mackenzie. "You understand that feeling, I think." She nodded slowly. "When my parents died, our farm went to pay debts. The house I grew up in, the fields I'd known all my life, suddenly they belonged to strangers. I couldn't bear to stay and watch someone else living my life. So you became a teacher." "It seemed like a way to matter," she said simply. "To build something that couldn't be taken away so easily." "Knowledge," Tucker agreed. "No one can take that from the children once you've given it to them." Mackenzie looked surprised. "Yes, exactly. Most men don't understand that." "Had a teacher once who changed my life," Tucker admitted. old man named Harrison, taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Pennsylvania, had no patience for laziness but would stay hours after school to help any child truly trying to learn. He smiled at the memory. Taught me that respecting a person's mind is as important as respecting their fists or their gun. He sounds wonderful, Mackenzie said. The kind of teacher I've tried to be. You must be good at it. The children in Helena's loss is my gain, I suppose. The words hung between them, weighted with more meaning than Tucker had intended. Mackenzie's eyes met his, a question in their depths that he wasn't sure how to answer. The moment was broken by one of the newborn calves stumbling to its feet, drawing their attention back to the miracle before them. Tucker stood, offering Mackenzie his hand. We should get back to the house. Morning comes early. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her up. Tucker, she said quietly as they walked toward the cabin. Thank you for teaching me about the calving. It means a lot that you trust me with something so important to you. You've earned that trust, he replied honestly. You work harder than hired hands I've paid good money. Is that all I am? She asked, her voice barely audible. A good worker. Tucker stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlit snow. Her face was partially shadowed, but he could see the vulnerability in her expression, the way she held herself as if bracing for rejection. No, he said finally, that's not all you are. He couldn't bring himself to say more, not yet. The feelings growing within him were still too fragile, too new to name. Mackenzie seemed to understand, nodding once before resuming their walk to the cabin. That night, Tucker dreamed of Elizabeth for the first time in years. In the dream, she stood in a sun-dappled meadow, her blonde hair shining, their son a toddler playing at her feet. But instead of the accusation or sorrow he might have expected, she was smiling at him with gentle understanding. It's time, Tucker, she said in the dream. Time to live again. He woke with tears on his face but a strange lightness in his heart, as if something long carried had finally been set down. Outside, the first birds of spring were beginning to sing, though snow still covered the ground. The promised social in Miles City took place in early March, when the worst of winter had passed, but spring had not yet truly arrived. Tucker and Mackenzie rode into town on a clear, cold afternoon, her wearing the green dress beneath her coat, him in the one decent suit he owned, rarely worn and slightly tight across the shoulders. The town hall had been decorated with paper streamers and early spring flowers brought in from the greenhouse at Fort Keogh. A small band played lively tunes, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Nearly everyone in the county seemed to be in attendance, eager for social interaction after the long isolation of winter. Mackenzie drew curious glances as Tucker helped her remove her coat. The green dress, modest by city standards but finer than most women in Miles City could afford, set her apart immediately. Her hair was arranged in an elegant twist, with a few curls left to frame her face, and she wore the gold locket that had belonged to her mother, her one remaining piece of jewelry. Everyone's staring, she whispered nervously to Tucker. Only because you're the prettiest woman here by far, he replied, offering his arm. Shall we? The evening progressed pleasantly. Tucker introduced Mackenzie to his neighbors and acquaintances as Miss Novak, who's helping at my ranch this season. If anyone questioned this arrangement, they were too polite to say so directly, though Tucker noted the speculative glances and whispers that followed them. Mrs. Harmon, the storekeeper's wife, approached them during a lull in the dancing. Miss Novak, that dress is even lovelier on you than I imagined. You must tell me, what brings a refined lady like yourself to our little corner of Montana? Before Mackenzie could answer, Sheriff Miller joined them. Yes, I've been wondering the same. You mentioned Helena before, I believe." Tucker felt Mackenzie tense beside him. "Miss Novak came west seeking adventure like many of us," he said smoothly. "Found teaching suited her talents." "Indeed," Mackenzie added, her voice calm despite the anxiety Tucker could sense beneath it. "I was at the Helena Academy for girls, but the position ended unexpectedly. I've been fortunate to find temporary employment with Mr. Sullivan while I consider my next steps." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting coincidence. Had a letter from the Helena sheriff last week. Seems a wealthy family there is searching for a missing schoolteacher. Novak isn't a common name." Tucker felt his muscles tighten, ready to defend Mackenzie if necessary. "Is that so?" "Yes," Miller continued, watching Mackenzie carefully. "Apparently she left rather suddenly, causing quite the stir. The Blackwell family is most concerned about her whereabouts." Mackenzie paled but kept her composure. "The Blackwells have a son, Richard, I believe," Miller nodded. "You know them?" "By reputation," she replied carefully. "If it's the same family, they own several mines and much of the town." "The very same," Miller confirmed. "The son is apparently heartbroken over this teacher's disappearance, offering a substantial reward for information about her." Tucker stepped slightly forward, placing himself subtly between Mackenzie and the sheriff. "Sounds like a personal matter, Frank. Not sure what business it is of ours here in Miles City." Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just making conversation, Sullivan. No need to get defensive." He tipped his hat to Mackenzie. "Enjoy your evening, Miss Novak. Town social is one of our simpler pleasures out here, but we make the most of it." As the sheriff moved away, Tucker felt Mackenzie's hand tighten on his arm. "He knows," she whispered. "Maybe," Tucker acknowledged. But he didn't say outright, "Let's not panic just yet." The music started again, a slow waltz this time. Tucker turned to Mackenzie. "Dance with me," she hesitated, clearly still shaken by the sheriff's implied knowledge. "Tucker, if he sends word to Helena." "Then we'll deal with it," he said firmly. "But tonight, right now, you're safe. Dance with me, Mackenzie." After a moment, she nodded, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. Tucker wasn't a skilled dancer by any means, but he knew the basic steps, and Mackenzie followed his lead gracefully. As they moved together to the music, he felt her gradually relax, the tension easing from her shoulders. "You're good at this," she commented, a small smile returning to her lips. Tucker shook his head. "Just trying not to step on your toes. Been a long time since I danced with anyone." "Elizabeth?" she asked softly. "Yes, our wedding was the last time." He looked down at her, surprised to find no pain in the memory. "She loved to dance." "I'm honored to be the one to dance with you again," Mackenzie said, her eyes meeting his with unexpected warmth. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of the connection that had been growing for weeks. Tucker found himself acutely aware of her hand in his, the curve of her waist beneath his other hand, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair. When the music ended, neither moved immediately, both reluctant to break the spell that had fallen over them. Finally, Tucker stepped back, offering his arm to escort her from the floor. "Would you like some punch?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. Before she could answer, a commotion at the entrance to the hall drew everyone's attention. A man Tucker didn't recognize had entered tall, expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to deference. Two other men flanked him, their stance suggesting bodyguards rather than companions. Tucker felt Mackenzie freeze beside him. "Richard," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Blackwell?" Tucker asked quietly, already knowing the answer. She nodded, her face draining of color. "How did he find me so quickly?" "Telegraph, most likely," Tucker muttered, his mind racing. "Sheriff must have sent word right after our last visit to town." Richard Blackwell was scanning the room, his gaze calculating and cold despite the smile fixed on his handsome face. Tucker moved subtly, positioning himself to block Mackenzie from immediate view. "Is there another way out?" she asked urgently. Tucker nodded toward a side door. "Through the kitchen. We can circle around to where the horses are tied." They began moving casually toward the side of the hall, trying not to draw attention. They had nearly reached the kitchen door when Sheriff Miller intercepted them. "Leaving so soon, Sullivan, Miss Novak." The emphasis he placed on her name made it clear he knew exactly who she was. "Early start tomorrow," Tucker replied evenly. "Spring roundup coming." Miller's eyes shifted to something over Tucker's shoulder. "Ah, Mr. Blackwell, over here, sir. I believe I've found who you're looking for." Tucker turned to see Blackwell approaching, his face lighting with satisfaction as he spotted Mackenzie partially hidden behind Tucker's broader frame. "Mackenzie, my dear, I've been frantic with worry." Blackwell's voice dripped with concern, but his eyes remained cold. "When you disappeared during that terrible storm, I feared the worst." Mackenzie stepped out from behind Tucker, her chin raised defiantly despite the trembling Tucker could feel in the hand that still gripped his arm. "Mr. Blackwell, how unexpected to see you so far from Helena." "I've searched everywhere for you," Blackwell replied. "When Sheriff Miller telegraphed that a Miss Novak matching your description had been seen in Miles City, I came at once." He extended his hand toward her. "Come, we should talk privately." Tucker felt a surge of protective anger. "Miss Novak doesn't appear interested in private conversation, Blackwell." Blackwell's eyes flicked to Tucker, dismissive and annoyed. "And you are, Tucker Sullivan. Miss Novak has been staying at my ranch." A flash of something ugly crossed Blackwell's face. "Indeed. How hospitable of you." He turned back to Mackenzie. "You've caused quite a scandal, my dear. Your reputation, my reputation," Mackenzie interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Was it concern for my reputation that led you to threaten me? To have me dismissed from 2 teaching positions when I refused your advances?" A murmur ran through the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. Blackwell's smile tightened. "You're clearly distraught, Mackenzie." "These wild accusations are entirely accurate," she cut in. "As Sheriff Taylor in Helena could confirm, had you not bought his silence along with half the town council." Blackwell took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You're making a scene, my dear. Come with me now and I'll forget this unfortunate rebellion." Tucker moved forward, placing himself firmly between Mackenzie and Blackwell. "The lady has made her wishes clear, Blackwell. I suggest you respect them." "This doesn't concern you, rancher," Blackwell sneered. "Mackenzie and I have an understanding." "The only understanding," Mackenzie said clearly, "is that I want nothing to do with you or your family. Please leave me alone." Blackwell's facade of charm slipped, revealing the cold anger beneath. "You think you can embarrass me like this? Do you know who I am? Who my father is?" "We know exactly who you are," Tucker said, his voice low and dangerous. "A man who thinks money gives him the right to whatever and whoever he wants. That might work in Helena, but not here." One of Blackwell's companions moved forward menacingly, but Sheriff Miller held up a hand. "Let's all calm down. Mr. Blackwell, while I appreciate your concern for Miss Novak, it appears she's not in any distress that requires intervention." Blackwell turned his cold gaze on the sheriff. "My father contributes generously to law enforcement throughout the territory, Sheriff. I would hate to see those contributions directed elsewhere due to a lack of cooperation in a simple matter." Miller's expression hardened. "Are you attempting to bribe me, sir? Because that would be most unwise." The tension in the room was palpable. Tucker maintained his position in front of Mackenzie, acutely aware of the weight of his gun at his hip and hoping desperately it wouldn't come to that. To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Harmon stepped forward, addressing Blackwell directly. "Mr. Blackwell, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Eliza Harmon, wife of Daniel Harmon, who owns the largest mercantile in Miles City." Blackwell looked confused by this interruption. "Madam, I fail to see. I was just thinking, Mrs." Harmon continued pleasantly. "How interesting it would be if word reached Helena's society pages about how Richard Blackwell caused a scene at our humble town social, attempting to force his attentions on an unwilling young woman." She smiled sweetly. "I correspond regularly with Mrs. Whitcomb, who I believe is a close friend of your mother's." The blood drained from Blackwell's face. His mother, Tucker recalled Mackenzie mentioning once, was a formidable society matron whose approval Blackwell desperately sought. "Furthermore, Mrs. Harmon added, my cousin serves on the board of the Helena Academy. She would be most interested to hear about the circumstances of Miss Novak's dismissal." For several tense moments, Blackwell stood frozen, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he straightened his jacket with a sharp tug. "It seems I've been misinformed about the situation. My apologies for the disruption." He turned to Mackenzie, his eyes still cold despite his conciliatory words. "If you change your mind, Miss Novak, you know where to find me." With a curt nod to the room at large, he gestured to his companions and strode toward the exit. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the crowd as the door closed behind him. Tucker turned to Mackenzie, finding her pale but standing tall. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, offering a tight smile to Mrs. Harmon. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay your kindness." The older woman patted her arm. "No need, dear. Men like that need to be reminded occasionally that money doesn't buy everything." She glanced meaningfully at Tucker. "You might want to leave while he's regrouping. I doubt he's truly given up." Tucker nodded, already thinking along the same lines. "Our horses are out back. We'll go now." Sheriff Miller approached as they were preparing to leave. "Sullivan," he said in a low voice. "Blackwell's not the type to forget an insult. Watch your back." Tucker met the sheriff's eyes. "Appreciate the warning, Frank. You going to tell him where to find us?" Miller shook his head. "Far as I'm concerned, I don't know exactly where Miss Novak is staying. Could be any ranch within 50 miles. "Thank you, Sheriff," Mackenzie said softly. Miller looked uncomfortable. "Just doing my job, madam, which sometimes means knowing when not to do it too thoroughly." He tipped his hat and moved away. The ride back to the ranch was tense and silent. Tucker kept a close watch on the trail behind them, though he doubted Blackwell would attempt anything immediately. Men like that preferred to strike when they held all the advantages. Once inside the cabin, Mackenzie sank into a chair, the brave front she'd maintained crumbling now that they were alone. "I'm so sorry, Tucker. I've brought trouble to your door." Tucker busied himself building up the fire. "Trouble has a way of finding me whether I invite it or not," he said lightly, trying to ease her distress. "Been in worse situations than standing up to a spoiled rich boy." Mackenzie shook her head. "You don't understand. Richard doesn't forget slights, and he has the resources to make good on his threats. When I refused him in Helena, he didn't just have me fired, he ensured I couldn't find lodging, couldn't even buy supplies in some stores." Tucker turned to face her. "We're not in Helena, Mackenzie. Folks here make their own judgments." "For now," she agreed. "But how long before he spreads rumors, before he makes it impossible for you to sell your cattle or buy supplies? How long before he bribes someone to burn your barn or poison your well?" The fear in her voice was real, and Tucker recognized that she wasn't being dramatic. She'd seen firsthand what Blackwell was capable of. "Then we'll face that when it comes," he said firmly. "I'm not sending you back to him, if that's what you're suggesting." Tears filled her eyes. I should never have stayed. Should have kept moving east as I planned. Tucker crossed the room, kneeling before her chair so they were eye to eye. Do you want to leave? Is that what you're saying? No, she whispered. That's what makes this so difficult. I don't want to go. Then stay, he said simply. Stay and we'll face whatever comes together. Mackenzie searched his face. Why would you risk everything for me? Your ranch, your reputation, your safety, it's too much to ask. Tucker took her hands in his calloused fingers enveloping her smaller ones. Maybe I'm not doing it just for you. Maybe I'm being selfish. Selfish, she repeated, confusion evident in her tear-bright eyes. These past months having you here. Tucker struggled to find the right words. It's like color coming back into a world that was all grays. I don't want to go back to that emptiness. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a hopeful vulnerability that matched his own. Tucker, I'm not good with fancy words, he continued, needing to say what had been building in his heart for weeks. But I know that, when I think about you leaving, it feels like winter coming back after a glimpse of spring. And I won't let Blackwell or anyone else take that away without a fight. A tear slipped down Mackenzie's cheek. I feel the same, she admitted softly. When I came here, I was running away. But now, the thought of leaving you feels like running away from something far more important. Tucker reached up, gently brushing away her tear with his thumb. Then don't run. Not anymore. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotion. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Tucker leaned forward. Mackenzie met him halfway, her lips soft and yielding against his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative with the newness of crossing this threshold together. Then Mackenzie's hands moved to Tucker's shoulders, and his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more honest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, Mackenzie Novak, he said quietly. Have been since you started arguing with me about how to mend fence posts. A surprised laugh escaped her. That long, probably earlier, he admitted with a smile. Just took me a while to recognize it. Mackenzie's hand came up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with wonder. I love you too, she whispered, even though it terrifies me. Being afraid doesn't make you weak, Tucker told her, makes you human. It's what you do despite the fear that matters. She nodded, her eyes holding his. Then I choose to stay. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Tucker kissed her again, sealing their promise. For the first time since she'd arrived in that desperate snowstorm, the future seemed not something to fear, but something to build together, a future worth fighting for. The following weeks brought an uneasy peace. Spring arrived in earnest, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots beneath. Tucker and Mackenzie settled into a new dynamic, their work relationship transformed by the acknowledgement of deeper feelings. Though both maintained a certain restraint, aware that trust and love needed time to fully bloom. Tucker found himself smiling more, whistling as he worked, noticing beauty in small moments he would previously have overlooked, the way morning light caught in Mackenzie's hair as she collected eggs, her laughter when a newborn calf nuzzled her palm, the quiet companionship of evenings by the fire. They heard nothing from Richard Blackwell, but the threat of his return hung over them like a storm cloud on the horizon. Tucker took precautions, asking his ranch hands to keep watch for strangers, making sure Mackenzie was never alone when he had to ride far from the cabin. She chafed occasionally at these restrictions, but understood their necessity. As April turned to May, the ranch burst into activity with the spring roundup. Additional hands were hired temporarily, and the days grew long with the work of branding new calves and preparing the herd for summer grazing. Mackenzie threw herself into the work, proving her worth repeatedly and earning the respect of even the most skeptical cowboys. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after a particularly exhausting day, Tucker took Mackenzie's hand. "Been thinking," he said, his voice carefully casual. She smiled. "A dangerous pastime." "Might be," he agreed with a chuckle. "Been thinking about the future, about us." Mackenzie's smile faded into something more serious, more hopeful. "What about us?" Tucker took a deep breath. "I know it hasn't been that long, and maybe this is too soon, but I've learned the hard way that life doesn't always give you second chances or more time." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Mackenzie. Want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Her eyes widened. "Tucker, are you asking you to marry me?" "Yes, I am." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object. "It was my mother's," he explained, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold band set with a small, perfect pearl. "Not fancy, but it's been in my family for generations." Mackenzie stared at the ring, then at Tucker's face, her expression a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "What about Blackwell? He won't just disappear because we're married." "No," Tucker agreed, "but being my wife gives you legal protections you don't have now. And it tells everyone, including Blackwell, that you've made your choice." She hesitated. "And the ranch, the work we've done together, continues," he assured her. "You've more than proven yourself. I don't want a wife who just keeps house. I want a partner." A slow smile spread across Mackenzie's face. "In that case, Tucker Sullivan, my answer is yes." Tucker's heart seemed to expand in his chest as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. He drew her into his arms, kissing her with all the emotion he couldn't put into words, the gratitude, the joy, the promise of a future neither had dared hope for just months ago. When they finally parted, Mackenzie rested her head against his chest. "When should we do it?" "Soon," Tucker said decisively. "No reason to wait. We could ride into town next week, have Reverend Collins marry us. Simple ceremony, nothing fancy." She nodded against his chest. "I'd like that, just us and maybe a few friends." She pulled back slightly to look at him. "Do you think your ranch hands will be shocked?" Tucker laughed. "Shocked that I finally got around to asking you, maybe. Pete's been giving me significant looks for weeks now." "Has he really?" Mackenzie asked, surprised. "They all have. Apparently, I'm less ornery since you came along." "Their words, not mine." She giggled, the sound girlish and carefree in a way Tucker hadn't heard before. It struck him then how much younger she seemed now compared to the frightened, exhausted woman he'd carried into his cabin during the blizzard. There was a lightness to her that came from feeling safe, from being loved. The thought sobered him. "There's something else we should discuss, Mackenzie, about children." Her expression grew serious. "You want them?" "I do," he admitted, "but I need you to understand something. I lost a child once, and it nearly destroyed me. The thought of going through that again terrifies me, but I want a family with you more than I fear the risk." Mackenzie's eyes softened with understanding. "I can't promise nothing will go wrong, Tucker. No one can. But I can promise that whatever comes, whatever joy or sorrow, we'll face it together." He nodded, throat tight with emotion. "That's all I ask." They were married the following week in a simple ceremony at the small church in Miles City. Mrs. Harmon helped Mackenzie prepare, lending her a lace shawl that had been in her family for generations. Tucker wore his one good suit, freshly pressed, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful, witnessed by a small gathering of friends and neighbors who had come to respect both Tucker and Mackenzie during her months in the community. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up seemed to shake the rafters of the little church. At the modest reception in the town hall, Sheriff Miller approached the newlyweds, pulling Tucker aside for a private word. "Thought you should know," he said quietly. "Had word from Helena. Seems Blackwell's father suffered a stroke last month. Family's in disarray, with the old man incapacitated and the mines needing management." Tucker absorbed this news. "So Richard's been called home to mind the family business." Miller nodded. "From what I hear, he's finding it more challenging than expected. Miners are threatening to strike and the bankers are circling. Doubt he has much time for personal vendettas at present." Relief washed over Tucker. "Appreciate the information, Frank." The sheriff clapped him on the shoulder. "You've got yourself a fine woman there, Sullivan. Brave and smart. Don't waste the good fortune." "Don't intend to," Tucker assured him, his eyes finding Mackenzie across the room, radiant in her simple white dress, laughing at something Mrs. Harmon had said. Later that evening, as they rode back to their ranch now, Tucker reminded himself Mackenzie leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. She tilted her face up to his, her eyes reflecting the stars overhead. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "When I arrived here that night, half frozen and terrified, I never imagined I'd find a home, a husband, a future." Tucker pulled his horse to a stop, turning in the saddle to face her properly. "You saved me too, you know. Was just existing before you came, not really living." Mackenzie touched his face gently. "Then we saved each other." He leaned down to kiss her, there under the vast Montana sky that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to spouses. As their lips met, Tucker thought about all the circumstances that had brought them to this moment: a desperate flight, a devastating storm, a chance encounter in the swirling snow. Some might call it luck or coincidence, but Tucker preferred to think of it as fate. Whatever name it went by, he was profoundly grateful for the woman in his arms and the life they would build together, a life that had truly begun the night she arrived in a snowstorm, nearly frozen, and he had warmed her with fire and then, eventually, with love. 5 years later, Tucker stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Mackenzie chased their 3-year-old son across the yard. Thomas, named for Tucker's father, shrieked with delight as his mother pretended to be unable to catch him. "Mama's too slow," the boy called, his dark auburn hair so like his mother's glinting in the afternoon sun. "I'll get you yet, you little rascal," Mackenzie called back, deliberately slowing her pace to prolong the game. Tucker smiled, one hand resting gently on the shoulder of the infant girl sleeping against his chest, in a sling Mackenzie had fashioned. Elizabeth Mackenzie Sullivan was barely 3 months old, with Tucker's blue eyes and a tuft of blonde hair that reminded him of his first wife in a way that brought comfort rather than pain. So much had changed in 5 years. The ranch had prospered, growing from 60 head of cattle to nearly 300. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house, with a separate kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a dedicated schoolroom where Mackenzie taught Thomas his letters and numbers, along with the children of their ranch hands and nearest neighbors. Richard Blackwell had never returned to trouble them. News had occasionally reached Miles City of the Blackwell family's declining fortunes, the mines becoming less profitable. Richard's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain their social standing. Tucker felt no satisfaction in another man's downfall, but was grateful for the peace it had brought to his family. Mackenzie caught Thomas at last, swinging him into her arms as he giggled uncontrollably. She carried him toward the porch, both of them flushed and happy from their game. "Mama says dinner's almost ready," Thomas announced importantly as they climbed the steps. "Is that so?" Tucker ruffled his son's hair. "And did Mama also say it's time for a certain young man's bath, Thomas wrinkled his nose. Don't need a bath. Oh, I think you do, Mackenzie countered, setting him down. Go ask Pete to help you pump some water for the tub. I'll be in shortly to help. The boy sighed dramatically but trotted off to find the ranch hand who had appointed himself unofficial uncle to the Sullivan children. Mackenzie moved to stand beside Tucker, gently adjusting the blanket around baby Elizabeth. "How's our little angel sleeping like?" "Well, like an angel," Tucker replied with a smile. "She's a good baby." "Takes after her father," Mackenzie said, leaning against his side. "Calm and steady." Tucker put his free arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "You seem happy today." "I am happy," she confirmed. "Every day, even the hard ones." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the activity of the ranch as the day wound toward evening. Cattle grazed in the distance. A new barn stood where the old one had been, and flowers that Mackenzie had planted bloomed along the path to the house. Everything spoke of permanence, of roots sunk deep into Montana soil. "You ever think about that night?" Tucker asked suddenly. "The blizzard when you first arrived," Mackenzie nodded against his shoulder. "Often. I was so certain I was going to die out there in the snow when I saw your light." She trailed off, the memory still powerful after all these years. It was like seeing hope itself. Tucker kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair. "For me, it was like seeing life ride out of the storm. Didn't know it at the time, of course." "Of course," she agreed with a smile in her voice. "You were too busy being gruff and suspicious." "Was not," he protested mildly. "Were too." She turned in his arm to face him. "But you were also kind and gentle and honorable, even when you had no reason to be." Tucker looked down at his wife's face, still as beautiful to him as it had been that first night, perhaps more so for the love and history that now existed between them. "Best decision I ever made, taking in a half-frozen schoolteacher." "And the second best?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. He pretended to consider seriously. "Probably asking that schoolteacher to marry me before she came to her senses." Mackenzie laughed, the sound mingling with the evening birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle, the soundtrack of their shared life. "Lucky for you, she never did come to her senses." Tucker looked around at the home they had built together, at the evidence of their love sleeping peacefully against his chest, at the woman who had transformed his solitary existence into something rich and full. "No," he corrected softly. "Lucky for me, she found exactly where she belonged." "Where we both belonged," Mackenzie amended, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his in a kiss that held all the warmth of their beginning and all the promise of their future. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, they both loved, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tucker Sullivan held his family close and gave silent thanks for snowstorms and desperate journeys, and the unexpected ways that love finds its way home.